Officers went to 533 Holcomb Street to arrest Baldwin, who police say has 13 outstanding warrants. When officers arrived at the house, Police Chief Charles Swindle says they were greeted by several hostile residents who began scuffling with the officers outside the house. Swindle says the officers then pursued one of the residents inside the home. There, police say Robinson, who was armed with a rifle, threatened the officers. Police say Robinson fled through the back door of the house and police gave chase. Swindle says one of the officers fired a shot, ordering Robinson to stop. Swindle says Robinson returned fire.
And it hit a storage shed, a wooden storage shed, where several of the fragments stuck in the officer's skin and through his clothing. This officer returned fire, hit the subject, he fell, regained his footing, got his rifle back, and started to shoot the officers Davis and Coker, who were still coming up the alley. And as he pointed the rifle at them, they returned the fire and hit him again.
Swindle says Robinson had been arrested for several assault and burglary charges. Investigators are baffled as to why Robinson became involved with the incident. But the chief says the officers acted professionally in connection with the incident. The investigation continues. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
Alabama should be a potent offensive team next season if several questions can be answered this spring. Coach Bear Bryant says that his line must improve and rapidly. All starters return and most positions are 3 deep, but Bryant says they just aren't mean enough. And he says he intends to find some that are. In the backfield, the Bama wishbone will be well stocked with proven runners. But Bryant says some of last year's starters are being pushed by some very talented freshmen. At quarterback, Paul Fields and promising freshman Perry Kuda are chasing Walter Lewis. Bryant says the sophomore from Bruton is having an excellent spring.
Of course, he can always run with the ball as quick as a cat. At times he throws the ball well. Other times he doesn't. But he's had a good spring. He had a lot of work. As a matter of fact, Paul Fields and Lewis has had practically all the work.
The biggest experiment of the spring is at tight end. Bart Kraut has graduated, and Bryant has moved several players in that important position. The leading candidate at the moment appears to be big 6'7", 275-pound Scott Holman.
First place, he lacks it. Scott's been around here a long time. He's big and tall, and he's hard to get off of people when they block him, and it's hard for him to get under people when he's blocking too. But I think it may help us there. We're gonna keep him there the entire spring and make that decision then.
The 1982 edition of the Crimson Tide will be on display next Saturday in Tuscaloosa. Kickoff for the annual A-Day game is set for 3 o'clock.
Anita and Emory met while attending the University of Alabama. They married after graduation, and he left a young bride behind as he went off to Korea.
Bob, I was afraid that Emory would get captured rather than that he would be killed. And I know that sounds sort of peculiar, but knowing Emory's personality, the torture of him being captured would be much worse than death.
After the Korean conflict, Anita and her war hero husband moved to Mobile, where they got their first taste of politics when Jimmy Faulkner ran for governor and asked Emory to work in his campaign.
I should have known, though, at the university when Emory was involved with Interfraternity Council politics, and we would walk up University Avenue. See, I was transferred as a junior. He'd been there for 3 years because he went straight through college. He was in a hurry to get out. But he knew everybody by name. And that should have told me something, Bob, but it didn't. But really, the first political action of any kind was the Faulkner campaign.
But 18 years later, Anita found herself married to a reluctant Montgomery City Council candidate.
That was not an easy decision for Emory to make, to get to get into local politics.
We were at a stage in life where we were able to travel with our children. They were grown or nearly so. They were friends as well as our children at this point. We had done some traveling. We'd gotten to the point in life where they were old enough to travel with, and we could afford to. And it was sort of like Well, here we start all over again. It didn't really make that much difference in our lives, though, as long as he was on the city council as president. And campaigning is fun.
In our next segment, Mrs. Falmer talks about what it's like to be married to an outspoken, tireless politician, including the night she and the family were awakened by shotgun blasts in their front yard. I'm Bob Howell, WSFA TV News, with a profile of Anita Falmer. Anita Falmer doesn't see her husband a lot. Typically, he's out of the house before 6 a.m. and not home again until 6 or 7 at night.
How do you deal with Emery when he brings his problems home from the office?
Well, frankly, I thoroughly enjoy some of it. I dissolve into tears at times, not frequently, but I get angry when somebody, I think unjustly, accuses him of something. I get angry at him when I think he's done something that is a little out of kilter. Emery would never do anything dishonest. He will negotiate, but he will not go beyond a certain parameter of what he thinks is right and wrong. But there are sometimes I think he might have done it a little bit differently. And sometimes he listens to me, and sometimes he doesn't. It's the type of life where you never know whether you're supposed to be in the picture or not.
While political polls show an increase in the mayor's popularity statewide, there are people in Montgomery who violently disagree with his hardline stance. Twice the Falmers' cars have had their windshields blown out by shotgun blasts. The last time came on a New Year's Eve.
And our son was down here watching TV, and by the time I hit the deck, Emery was looking out the window and started down the steps. Wilson was coming up the steps, because we all knew that it was gunfire. It's just a part of the game. It's a shame in the world today that we live in that people can't step forward and say, I want to serve my community. You know, I want to serve my state, I want to serve my county, my city, without drawing nuts. And some people are twisted so that to do something like this makes them feel big shot.
There's been a lot of strong speculation that Emery will be running for governor of the state of Alabama. Would you like to see him governor?
If he wants to be governor, I can handle whatever he, I think, comes up with. I have so far, more or less.
Are you ready to be the first lady of the state of Alabama?
Well, let me put it this way. In a sense, I have been, because there were many things, with Montgomery being a city, which is also the capital, there were many things that I was called on to do in the last few years that could have been shared perhaps by someone else.
Do you ever drive down South Perry Street very slowly and look off to the left?
Occasion.
I'm Bob Howell, WSFA TV News, with a profile of Anita Falmer.
First platoon is going to remain back here in the CP, right here, with a perimeter set up here. Now, when these three platoons move out, 2 men per position, got to make that 3 men per position, will drop down, and I will show you what positions you're going to occupy in the perimeter, because we're going to receive supplies in here.
For this report, the fact that Larry is a Negro is of paramount importance. To the officers and men he serves with, it's a matter of total irrelevance.
We might stay here tonight, we might not, so don't...
Larry knows them well.
Sergeant Wilson joined the platoon sometime during August. After he got over the first rough steps or two, he was okay. Sergeant Wilson is a go-getter. He likes to move. He likes to move a little fast at times. this one kid, Arkansas. Well, I can tell right away when something's wrong with him. Because if he's not talking, something's bothering him.
I will be moving on.
Jim Hawkins is fire team leader in the 3rd Squad. Hawkins, I know personally. I don't know, the way he talks and the way I talk, it just seems like we have something in common. Well, where I live now and where Hawkins lives in Chicago is just about Holland distance.
Any questions on this?
We picked up Lieutenant Wilkinson as a forward observer for the company. And there's no telling when you're going to hit Charlie and actually need artillery, so he's going to have to be on his toes. He's not afraid of it. And he can bring that stuff in so doggone close to make your hair rise up on your head. I've only had the one platoon leader since I've been here, and that's Lieutenant Unger. Lieutenant Unger, he understands a basic problem of the individual, which is, I think, is more important than knowing all of this to know he'll listen to all the problems.
This is 6, Roger. They should be in at about 03. As soon as they join up with you, give me a call, let me know, and I'll have instructions for you. Outbreak 466, over.
Captain Matarudas, he's the company commander. He's real sharp with words. And if you screw up, you can expect to be nailed by it.
466, how many packs do you have on that ship didn't make it, over? Have you made contact with 2nd Squad? Sir? You want to start dialing right in here? Squad.
The Supreme Court is finding itself in a squeeze. Last Thursday, the Senate and House acted astonished about the governor taking a 2-day vacation when it was ready to give him the controversial current use property tax bill. Then the Senate asked the Supreme Court Friday to agree with it. The governor had thrown the state into a constitutional crisis by closing his office while the legislature was in session. Today, the governor accused the Supreme Court of having a vested interest in the mood of the Senate, which holds a potential 33% judicial pay raise in the Rules Committee, whose chairman, Albert McDonald, was also a prime mover of the current use property tax measure.
Closing this office 2 days is a constitutional crisis. The initial hearing, or to even suggest such a that thing, defies the imagination. Something is wrong, Ralph. Something is wrong.
The motion asking the justices to excuse themselves has been filed with the Supreme Court, but the justices worked on other cases today and aren't expected to rule on the governor's motion or the Senate requested opinion until tomorrow. The adversaries on both sides of the issue have openly enjoyed the new forum for their political maneuverings. Current use supporters smiled when faced with the unique obstacle of the governor's absence last week, and Governor James showed up in his office this morning, sporting a fishing rod and a smile for photographers. While both sides seem to be enjoying this political game, there could be some serious legal impacts from the outcome on the separation of powers between the executive and the legislative branch, and it puts the judicial branch in the middle. Following his news conference this morning, Governor James left for Washington for an appearance on C-SPAN, the Congressional Public Access Network. Cassandra Taylor has more on that.
C-SPAN's talk show host, Brian Lamb, says Governor James broke the show's record on the number of phone calls from Alabama. Most of the Alabama callers were very supportive of the governor and his ideas, including 2 people who asked why he decided to go fishing last week while the legislature was in session. There were also a number of calls from other states. Most dealt with the governor's support of President Reagan's new federalism.
I think that there's a misunderstanding here. I think the fallacy that I oppose is 12 to 13% inflation. Since the early 60s, the dollar has become unstable. It doesn't hold its value from one generation to the other. The dollar is priced out of the market for the average American. You can't pay 13, 14, 15, 16, 17% interest and buy a home and buy a car. There is no economic opportunity because of that. Now, as far as a safety net is concerned, or help to those that are truly needy, I think new federalism will allow that to become a reality.
Overall, Governor James was well received. Most of the callers said they agreed with his ideas and wished he would run for office in their states. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
Governor James said this morning he was shocked to hear that his two-day fishing vacation had been termed a constitutional crisis.
The initial hearing ought to even suggest such a that thing defies the imagination. Something is wrong, Ralph. Something is wrong.
The governor instead suggested a greater crisis happens when the legislature uses a number of parliamentary procedures like stopping the clock, refusing or expediting the acceptance of bills, and taking a 7-day vacation before the last day of the session in order to circumvent the governor's pocket veto authority.
But based on the distinguished members of the Supreme Court, and if they compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges, then I would think that they would state a constitutional crisis exists when the legislature comes into session.
But the governor's most serious accusation centers on the judicial pay raise issue, which is pending in the Senate Rules Committee, chaired by Senator Albert McDonald, who sponsored the resolution involving the Supreme Court.
Because of the aforesaid personal financial interest of all of the individual justices of this honorable court, they should recuse themselves from any participation in this matter. That motion has been filed with the court.
The governor denies his vacation had anything to do with avoiding the just-passed current use bill, which is supported by House Speaker Joe McCorkadale and Lieutenant Governor George McMillan. Over the weekend, McMillan accused the governor of a ruse, defined this morning as a devious scheme.
Georgie Porgy is slicing the pie with special interest on the sly. Along come the governor, flying high. Now Georgie Porgy has started to cry.
Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Come on. You get right out in, I'll get on this side. Hold that side of it right there now. When I say put it on here, we're going to ease it right in here. You keep it tight. Now, I've got radios. You can get this message in. Anytime that you will see something that you deem Alabama, and crime is everybody's business wherever it occurs, because it's costly not only in personal trauma, but it's costly in dollars. And wherever you see something that you deem to be suspicious, if you let some law enforcement agency know about it, then that law enforcement agency...
Frank Robinson was 44 years old. He lived here at 533 Holcomb Street, and he died here in a small alley between a house and a garage about 50 yards from the back door of his home. Police say yesterday afternoon 2 officers went to Robinson's home in search of another man. Police say while there they were attacked by a group of area residents. One officer chased an assailant into the house where he was met by Robinson, who threatened the officer with a high-powered rifle before running out the back door of his home. Police say outside they fired a warning shot and told Robinson to stop. Police say he fired back. Today on Holcomb Street, many of Robinson's neighbors are reluctant to talk about what they saw or heard yesterday afternoon around 6 o'clock, but they don't hesitate to say they thought of Robinson as a good man. No one we talked to ever knew him to be in any trouble. So many Holcomb Street residents wonder how it is on an Easter day, just minutes after Robinson drove up in front of his home, that he would be lying dead. Police say after Robinson shot at them, he was shot once, dropped the rifle, then picked it up and pointed it at police before being shot again. People along the street disagree on how many shots were fired. It ranges from 4 to 6. Walls of buildings along the path Robinson followed are marked with bullet holes. Robinson's station wagon is sitting where he left it. Some residents are angry at police. They say things didn't happen the way police say they did, but they won't say more. Relatives at Robinson's home won't release pictures of Robinson and won't talk about what happened. It's not the first time a man has been killed on Holcomb Street by police. A few years ago, another shooting caused a major upheaval in city government. More on that in the 10 o'clock report. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
At the top of the news, the hearing on allegations that a high-ranking PSC staff member placed bets on athletic events is still in session. Gina Gregory has been at the hearings and is at the Capitol complex with this live report. Gina?
Mac, Wayne Wright is the head of the engineering department for the PSC, and he's charged with placing bets from his office for other employees. Commissioners are still hearing testimony from witnesses, some who are former employees and some who are current employees. They're testifying on Wright's alleged betting activities within the PSC. The first witness this afternoon was William Crew, a former employee with Rate Analysis. He told the commissioners that on several occasions he placed bets through Wayne Wright.
To this commission today that Wayne Wright was a bookie.
I'm saying I placed bets with him, and he took the money. Make your own opinion.
The second witness was Steve Bartlett. He is currently with the Rate Analysis Division. He testified that he too placed bets through Wright, but Bartlett said as far as he knows, Wright was not acting as a bookie because, Bartlett said, Wright did not make a profit. Bartell says if he bet $10 and lost, then he had to pay an extra $1, something Bartell called juice, and that's what the bookie made. Bartell also told of a hit list that he says he's on because he testified for past grand juries. He says he's on that hit list because he told of things going on within the PSC that some of the members, say commissioners, did not want to be known about. And Mac, I'll have more on that in our 10 o'clock report.
Thank you, Gina. The two-day vacation incident pitting the governor's office against...
Cofield claims Officer Willis choked him October 16, 1980, while Officers McCrae and Conway held him down. Cofield says that morning he had gone to the prison nurse to get medical treatment for a foot ailment and was following the nurse's instructions to apply the medication before joining a work detail. Cofield says he almost lost consciousness during the attack, which he claims was done without good reason.
It was non-provoked. I really can't say what the officer's motive was at the particular time the incident was going on.
State Attorney Winfield Sinclair denies his clients physically beat Cofield. Sinclair says an internal investigation by the Department of Corrections revealed no such incident took place, and Sinclair says this case is not related to the Jefferson Lowe trial, which resulted in the dismissal of 4 Draper officials accused of allegedly beating or allowing the inmate to be physically abused. The trial is set to begin Thursday morning. Cofield says he'll question 3 witnesses, including 2 prison inmates and a former prison official, William Benton, who Cofield says saw the alleged incident. The defense will question the 3 prison officers who attorneys say admit they had to physically restrain Cofield, but say they did not physically beat him. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the Federal Courthouse.
3 Draper correction officers without good reason or just cause or legal cause choked and held me down and strangled me almost to death on October 16, 1980.
Cofield claims he did not provoke the attack and offered no resistance. He says that morning he had gone to the prison nurse for medical treatment and was following the nurse's instructions to apply the medication. He says Officer Willis choked him while Officers McCrae and Conway held him down. Cofield says he did not resist the attack. State attorneys representing the 3 officers deny they physically assaulted Cofield, but admit they had to restrain the former inmate. Sinclair says an internal investigation by the Department of Corrections revealed no incident took place. The trial begins Thursday morning. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
The governor is saying a judicial pay raise issue pending in the Senate casts a cloud over how the court will rule in its opinion. The opinion was sought by the Senate, where a Judicial Compensation Commission report giving judges as much as a 33% pay raise sits in the Rules Committee. The committee is chaired by Senator Albert McDonald, a prime mover of the current use property tax measure and sponsor of the resolution involving the Supreme Court in the incident. Those current use supporters said last week that James' impromptu vacation was to avoid the current use bill, which had just cleared the legislature.
Oh, I don't think it has anything to do with any one piece of legislation. There's plenty of time. Actually, my going fishing didn't affect that bill at all. But that's all academic. I think the governor has a right to give his people Thursday and Friday off, Friday, Good Friday, any week in the year if he wants to do it.
The governor also listed a number of parliamentary procedures used by the legislature to pass the current use bill.
We have never complained.
The reaction of the Supreme Court on Governor James' motion and the Senate requested opinion is expected tomorrow. But Governor James won't be here. He's in Washington for meetings with Budget Director David Stockman and later with attorneys in New York who'll handle the complex multi-million-dollar oil windfall investment plan. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Plenty of time. Actually, my going fishing didn't affect it.
There was, as your report said, at 6 o'clock, the warning shot was fired. That is incorrect. The man ran out the back door, pointed the rifle at a police officer. The officer fired a shot at the man, missed him. No warning shot was fired. My response to the neighborhood that Robinson is a good fellow is answered right here in this criminal history of Mr. Frank Robinson, where it says he was charged with assault with a deadly weapon in 1957, assault to murder against a police officer in 1964, assault to murder in 1968, leaving the scene of an accident in 1969, and 1969 the burglary of an inhabited dwelling at night, which is a capital offense. This is the good man that was referred to at 6 o'clock. There was a bullet hole shown in the 6 o'clock news in a building. That bullet hole was about 3 inches from a police officer's head, and it was fired by the assailant. We sent that officer to the hospital, which the 6 o'clock news didn't say, and picked the wood out of him last night, out of his face, his arms, and his chest. That implied on the television that this was just a random shot fired. That was not. That was a .30-30 rifle fired at that police officer close enough that he felt the muzzle heat from it. My response to what the neighbors will not say about what happened up there is contained in this file. This is what the neighbors did say happened from his mother down. It didn't say, too, that we picked up the badge and most of the shirt of a young police officer laying on the front porch of this house where he was assaulted, and that one man was assaulted with a Coca-Cola bottle. And in these statements, she tells us exactly how she threw and beat with the Coca-Cola bottle. Now, these statements come from yesterday afternoon from the people that was involved in this. And they give a detailed account of the fray, the fight, near right that took place on the front porch of this place, of this house, where this man, who was not even involved in it to start with, came out with a rifle and was going to shoot the police officers. But nowhere in there does it say, it's hard to describe today how a police officer was assaulted. Just like Mayor Pearl McCord down on the street, it's hard today to say what went on down there because it's daytime now. Things have quietened down. Yes, it's tragic that Easter afternoon had to be broken up like this. It was not of our making. We didn't want to go up there and have a fight with this man in any shape, form, or fashion. But this clean living gentleman just so happens to live on Holcomb Street, assaulted a police officer with a rifle, and we can't change the name of the street. I'd like to say that this killing of this individual yesterday is a tragic thing in the city of Montgomery and should not have had to happen. But the officers can't stand there and be shot either. And it's incumbent upon all of us to do what's right. I think the officers acted, again, I said yesterday, professionally. I think they've done exactly what they were trained to do. And that's one, not get killed. We tried to handle the situation as best we could up there. And unfortunately, some people won't let us do that. There are some folks in this town that's just mean as hell. We run into them every day. And I wish the media had covered the entire story before it was aired at 6 o'clock and given the police department a chance at really saying really what happened up there on Holcomb Street, in our opinion.
Engineering Director Wayne Wright says he's not now and has never been a bookie. He admits placing bets for himself and other employees, but he says that was years ago, and testimony from current and former employees backed up Wright's testimony.
I'd say, Wayne, can I play this game or that game? Wayne did not say, hey, I'll play some for you, so forth. I went to him and I said, would you mind playing this game for me?
During the hearing, lawyers for Wright presented the current Alabama law regarding betting and bookmaking. They said a bookie constitutes someone who places bets for profits as a business. What Wright did, they said, was place casual bets.
But testimony here concerned more than perjury and bookmaking. Steve Bartell told commissioners about a hit list circulating. He said those named were ones who had testified before the grand jury during past probes into PSC activities. And more testimony about threats to employees who testified before the grand jury came from a former deputy district attorney who headed up a PSC investigation last March. Charles Trincali said some employees told him they were being threatened for their testimonies. He said he received those complaints then, but he also says the district attorney's office has received similar complaints recently. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News at the Public Service Commission.
Good questions. The first question about the revenue. The Congress, under new federalism, still have prerogative if they think one state because of...
Please. All right, I'd first like to say hello to the governor. The state legislature can do about it, like using oil lease money in that respect.
We can look into that and will. The federal government is cutting back some. Those subsidies have gotten out of hand. As I understand it, people eligible with families earning $40,000, $50,000, a very high default rate.
Several weeks ago, the County Commission approved $200,000 for the Brubaker Community Center. Since that time, the City Council approved $200,000 in cash and $200,000 in labor, materials, and other services. Project spokesman John Morgan says they need an additional $50,000. Morgan says the original plan included a gym and locker area, arts and crafts, activities, and a meeting area. But now they've trimmed the project to a 15,000 square foot structure. The arts and crafts, activities, and meeting rooms will be added at a later date. Morgan says the $650,000 should finance the entire project. He says city officials have promised that if they can come up with the $50,000 within 30 days, the city will start work immediately. He says it should be complete by the end of October. Commissioner John Knight voiced his disapproval of what he called misleading information from city officials on the project. Then, the commission unanimously approved the $50,000 request. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
State Senator Lister Hill Proctor is chairman of the committee overseeing the block grant funds. Proctor's committee is supposed to devise a formula to distribute the money and make recommendations on ways to spend part of the funds which stay at the state level. Proctor is recommending that 90% of the money be distributed to local school boards and the remaining 10% be kept at the state level. Education officials say one key factor in distributing the money is that local school systems will have total discretion in deciding how the money should be spent on its 29 programs. At the local level, Proctor recommends the block grant funds be distributed this way. 80% of the money goes to schools based on student enrollment, 10% for academically superior students, 8% for low-income students, and 2% for tax measures. The board took Proctor's formula under advisement. Also today, the board unanimously passed new testing security guidelines for state schools, which it will closely monitor. Board members learned of cheating incidents in some schools and want to stop any possible future incidents. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
May I say this?
The gathering had all of the ingredients of an old-time Wallace political rally. Nothing new for the man who has held the office of governor for 3 terms and is strongly considering a 4th. The crowd of about 500 senior citizens from several surrounding counties applauded loudly as Wallace talked about the old days and current hard economic times, which he says the country can and will overcome. With a grin on his face, the former governor talked about his health in regards to his possible candidacy for governor.
Well, I don't feel quite as good as I did before I got shot 5 times, but I don't think you'd feel all that good either after that happened. But I feel good enough to have served as governor, and although this is not a political situation and I'm not sure whether I'll be involved again, I want to tell them I feel good enough to be governor of Alabama again if I decide that you in Alabama want me to be governor.
Reuben Hannon, president of the League of Aging Citizens, a longtime supporter of Wallace, says Alabama's elderly are suffering from federalism, which he says Governor James strongly supports.
Federalism's going to destroy the programs that we receive from Washington. 40 programs are going to be through the drain, and George Wallace is our only salvation.
Other senior citizens seem to echo similar support for Wallace.
I've been for him, oh gosh, ever since he started running. This hat's 12 years old.
You think he'd be better than Governor James has been?
I know that, sure.
Why?
Because I know he done been governor before, and I already know what he'll do.
Many political observers in recent months have questioned whether Wallace is indeed serious about a 4th term as governor, and it looks as though he'll keep them guessing for a while longer. From Tallahassee, Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
State highway officials say traffic has been moving very well since the overpass opened this morning. The new highway should divert traffic from the Atlanta Highway Eastern Boulevard intersection that's been called one of the worst intersections in the state. This afternoon, there were a few state highway workers on the job trying to complete the project. Montgomery police were on hand this morning directing traffic, but a few drivers were still confused by the signs. The service roads on each side of the Eastern Boulevard are one way from the I-85 interchange to the new overpass. Despite the number of one-way and wrong-way signs, some motorists still ended up the wrong way. Then there were those who just had to go to Eastdale Mall and would do almost anything to get there. So far, there have been no accidents, and state highway officials say it'll probably take a couple of days before the motorists become comfortable with the new directions. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
McMillan came on strong in a 15-minute address to about 80 members of the Congress, people who since last August have been trying to find ways to keep human service programs going in the face of massive federal budget cuts. McMillan told the Congress it's time government leaders know and understand the needs of their public.
So what I say to you is check yourself, and if you find your values, if you find your beliefs to be superior to those you hear being articulated in the public sector, then you assert your presence. You have the courage to be involved. You have the courage to help shape the direction of the state of Alabama, because the people of this state are good people.
McMillan said people who care about human services must educate government leaders, convince them that a majority of votes exists only for those government leaders who are concerned about people and want to do what's right. McMillan said large strides were made in the 1960s to improve social services, but some of the programs founded then have fallen by the wayside. McMillan called on members of the Congress to bring those issues back before the public, to seek more social reform. McMillan says it's time to look to the future while taking care to avoid the mistakes of the past. Earlier in the day, a government leader from Washington spoke to the Congress about the future. More on what he said in the 10 o'clock report. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News. McMillan told the Congress that government leaders need to be educated to the fact that a majority of voters does exist to support those government officials who care about doing what is right for people. And he encouraged the Congress to make itself heard in government. But McMillan wasn't the only one with that message for the Congress. Earlier in the day, the president of the Human Services Information Center in Washington, D.C., Jewel Sugarman, told the Congress members that part of their success in the future will depend on making the Congress known in the state legislature. Sugarman briefed the 80 or so members of the Congress today on the status of the federal budget and how it is affecting social service programs. Later in the day, Sugarman spoke with several state legislators about the Congress and human services in general, and he told the Congress the legislators share many of the same concerns. Sugarman again reminded the Congress that human services today are a very crucial policy issue, telling the Congress members, if you neglect politics, politics will neglect you. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
The Supreme Court's opinion was requested by the Senate when the current use property tax measure had passed the legislature last week. Current use supporters were accusing the governor of trying to delay acceptance of the bill, giving the governor more time to hang on to the bill before being forced by law to act on it. The Supreme Court's opinion sided with the Senate. The Senate Journal and the House Journal reflect that the bills taken to the governor's office last Thursday were officially delivered that day. But the governor, in a telephone news conference from Washington this morning, says the Supreme Court's opinion is just that, an opinion. His journal reflects the bills, including the current use measure, being accepted just yesterday when the governor's office reopened after the 4-day weekend. When current use bill was accepted only makes a logistical difference as to when the bill must be acted on by the governor. Neither the Senate or House reflected deadline or the governor's deadline fall outside of the end of the session. But the Supreme Court's opinion has started another political squabble. Governor James had asked the court not to issue the opinion since the same Senate that asked for the opinion also holds a judicial pay raise measure. The governor called this set of circumstances an apparent conflict of interest, but the court rejected the governor's position, saying they've issued opinions in the past for the legislature while judicial pay raises were pending. But the governor insists the conflict exists, and he's filed for a ruling from the Montgomery County Circuit Court that would agree that the 6 of the 9 Supreme Court justices who signed the opinion should have excused themselves from the issue. A ruling is expected tomorrow morning. The governor said he also intends to ask for an investigation of the circumstances by the Judicial Inquiry Commission. The governor contends this entire incident is a challenge of the separation of the powers of the 3 branches of government. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Now, I know that there are several other witnesses who will testify later during these proceedings present. If we could invoke the rule and ask for those.
Sir, I don't have any problem with it. Okay.
Stand with whichever interview would like.
The letter will be entered into the record. We have, or what's your...
Wayne, can I play this game or that game? Wayne did not say, hey, I'll play some for you, so forth. I follow it anymore.
Have you, in the last 3 years, seen Wainwright with any betting sheet?
But it is my understanding.
Rather than taking out reports and placing them on the agenda separate.
It has nothing to do with if you would like to make a motion.
Jesse Lewis.
About that particular item on the agenda.
You agree with
Something like that, but I think there's consensus here, we all have the same concept, that's kind of like.
You know, we are facing some very difficult times in these United States, but I'm talking to one group. My health is fine. I want those who think that Wallace is not in good health. They ask me sometime, how do you feel? I said, well, I don't feel quite as good as I did before I got shot 5 times, but I don't think you'd feel all that good either after that happened. But I feel good enough to have served as governor, and although this is not a political situation, and I'm not sure whether I'll be involved again, I want to tell them I feel good enough to be governor of Alabama again if I decide that you in Alabama want me to be governor. So, thank you, Reuben. Thank you very much, Reuben. Thank you very much. I ended up at Tallahassee, Alabama on the day before the election because we always had such large, friendly crowds. And therefore, it's good to be back here with you today.
Despite a request from Governor James that the Supreme Court members excuse themselves from issuing any advisory opinion, 6 of the 9 justices today released the opinion anyway. The opinion was sought by the Senate, and it says the Senate officially delivered bills to the governor last week, even though the governor was on a fishing trip and his staff enjoying a 4-day weekend. Although it's not official in any capacity, most officials say the apparent motivation for all of this is the current use property tax measure, which was among the bills delivered Thursday. Current use supporters accuse the governor of trying to avoid the bill, thus jeopardizing its chances, even though both sides now agree the bill hasn't been jeopardized. Beyond the current use issue, another matter has developed, an issue raised by Governor James. He held the Supreme Court was in an apparent conflict of interest by issuing an opinion for the Senate, which now controls a judicial pay raise measure. The court didn't agree with the governor, but the governor insists to the point of taking the matter to the circuit court level in Montgomery, where a ruling is tentatively expected in the morning. The governor also told reporters that he'll ask the Judicial Inquiry Commission to investigate the apparent conflict involving the 6 Supreme Court justices. The reaction to the Supreme Court ruling in the House and Senate was basically one of enjoyment today, but the House did defend the governor somewhat when it stopped a resolution requiring the governor to be in his office while the legislature was in session. In other action, the House and Senate approved a state employee reclassification plan, which its sponsors say will not cut anyone's pay and likely increase the pay for most. The plan could be implemented in 2 weeks. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Policemen were out this morning directing traffic soon after the new overpass opened, but later in the day they left and motorists were on their own. Drivers seem to have no problems on the Eastern Boulevard and new overpass, but there is some confusion about the service roads. Both sides used to have 2-way traffic. Now both are 1-way. State highway officials have placed a number of 1-way and wrong-way signs, but some motorists didn't see them until it was too late. Another problem some motorists have found is trying to get to Eastdale Mall. Now that the old exit to the mall has been closed, motorists are forced to cross the overpass if they don't take one of 2 new exits. One is next to Monticello Drive, the other is next to the Alcazar Shrine. Then some motorists thought they could continue down the service road and go the back way to Eastdale Mall without getting on the Atlanta Highway. Even though that entrance is blocked, some motorists went that way anyway. Even with the confusion, there have been no accidents. State highway officials say it'll take a couple of days for motorists to adjust to the new directions. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
Only one of the suspects who went before Judge Truman Hobbs is from Alabama. He's 61-year-old Robert Autry of Camden, The other suspects are from California, Pennsylvania, and Florida. A co-defendant indicted in the drug trafficking case, 43-year-old Gerald Lee Esri of Meta Vista, California, is already awaiting trial. State and federal officers nabbed the men March 23rd when a DC-4 plane landed on an airstrip near the small community of Hurtsboro. Authorities say the plane was loaded with an estimated 16,000 pounds of Colombian marijuana with a street value of about $8 million. Agents who had staked out the landing strip also seized 5 trucks, 3 cars, a motorhome, and the plane. The trial for the 17 suspects is set for June 1st. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the federal courthouse.
In politics, a lot of you I know, I see my friend Bobby Blacko, reminds me of politics and the problems and perils. He started eating his breakfast. So my honey said, hi. We're in recess now. When we go back, we're going to have to face one thing in the next few weeks is the debt limit. We owe $1 trillion, and there's going to be a movement to up the debt limit past the $1 trillion so the Treasury can borrow. In other words, so we can continue to have a deficit financing. And I have voted against that since I've been in Congress, upping the debt limit, because it's a ratification of what we're borrowing. And there might be a problem there. That might be the whole game about years, and I can't please him. And I folded it up. Good food. I said, it would be great to eat there. I didn't know this would happen, but it will be great. Being in politics, a lot of you I know, I see my friend Bobby Blacko has good food. I said, it would be great to eat there. I didn't know this would happen, but it will be great. Being in politics, as long as there is a deficit of this degree, the Wall Street markets are not going to respond in a positive way. They see inflation coming down the road. You've got a savings pool of so many billions of dollars in America, and if the government is borrowing over 50% of it each year, what is it doing to the large business, the small business, the homeowner, the individual? That perception of inflation's there, and it's going to be tough. But if we don't do it now, I really believe that if we as a Congress don't see this through, in other words, not just what we... Mad, and she said 48 of them. I said, well, you got a problem. But it's certainly good to be here in Montgomery. I served 8 years in the legislature. Y'all, a lot of...
The State Highway Department has had offices in this location since 1964, but now the entire operation is moving out to Coliseum Boulevard, to the same site as the old maintenance shop. This afternoon, 9 construction companies submitted bids for the project. The apparent low bidder is Andrew and Dawson of Montgomery, with a base bid of $7,070,000.
The state has many agencies that are now renting from private industry, and we need additional space. We have some buildings out on Coliseum Boulevard that we can convert to office space and add on to, and this will let this building be used by other state agencies and will save the state, in I estimate, at least $1 million a year in rental cost.
The new complex will be smaller than the present building, but the new building's interior has an open office design. Highway officials predict the concept will save the state thousands of dollars in utility bills. Kim says construction on the new project should begin when the Highway Department gets its share of the oil lease windfall money, which he predicts will be within the next 60 to 90 days. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
This year, $3 million is available from the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development for Montgomery. So during the past year, the mayor's office and the Citizens Participation Group, composed of people from each city council district, have been trying to come up with plans for spending the money. The mayor's plan and the CPG plan are very similar. Both call for expenditures of $3,041,000. Under both plans, Districts 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 would each receive $375,000 for items ranging from street improvement and drainage projects to recreation improvements and a community center. Both plans also call for District 7 to get $158,000 for drainage projects and lights for a ball field. District 9 would get $170,000 for street improvements. Districts 1 and 8 would receive no money from the HUD grant. The biggest chunk of the money, just more than $738,000, would go to city projects, divided among housing code demolition, converting the old South Montgomery YMCA building into a therapeutic recreation center to serve the city's handicapped and disabled citizens, and other projects. It's also under city projects that the only difference in the mayor's plan and the CPG plan appears. The CPG would give $50,000 to the Montgomery Heritage Movement, while the mayor would put that money in the contingency fund. City Coordinator Tyson Howard in the Department of Planning and Development says 2 public hearings have already been held on the HUD money. Another will be held at tonight's City Council meeting. It will be the last chance for public input on the plan before it comes up for a council vote. Once the council votes on a plan for the HUD money, it will be printed in local newspapers for the public to look at, then submitted to HUD for final approval. If all goes as planned, the $3 million in federal money should go to work in the city in about 2 weeks. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
We're talking about such thing as our heating and cooling, where we can utilize outside air whenever possible. I believe there is a tank that will be in the ground that will store some heat to be used at times from various sources. The lighting in it is a variable lighting concept to where on bright days the lights won't be as intense as they will on the darker days, so to speak. And also in the placing of the windows, the panels around the windows, all of this is to keep sunlight in and cut down on cooling costs.
Housing Authority Chairman Frank Parquette says the current architect working on the Cedar Park project, Pat Williams, decided to resign because of health reasons. Williams sent the board his resignation, which is effective immediately. He worked on the project until it was 95% complete. Then on March 29th, he filed for bankruptcy with the U.S. Bankruptcy Court. After accepting Williams' resignation, the members voted to hire Hill & Cole architects to complete the job. Architect Luther Hill went out to the construction site on Monday and has been going through the project's plans. The board members asked him to go over the entire project and come back to them with recommendations of items that need to be corrected. Hill says his preliminary inspection has revealed a drainage problem at one end of the housing project. Housing Authority Executive Director J.C. Miller says over $2 million has already been paid on the project. He says originally it was supposed to cost $2.5 million, but so far there have been $155,000 in changes that have been made. The Housing Authority should meet with Hill in the next week or so to hear his report on the construction progress. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
Trial date for the 17 suspects has been set for June 1st in Judge Myron Thompson's courtroom. Only one of the suspects on trial is from Alabama, 61-year-old Robert Autry of Camden. The other men are from California, Pennsylvania, and Florida. A co-defendant indicted in the drug trafficking case is already awaiting trial. He's 43-year-old Gerald Lee Esri of Meta Vista, California. State and federal agents staked out a landing strip near the tiny community of Hurtsboro on March 23rd. Agents say that morning, a DC-4 plane landed carrying an estimated 16,000 pounds of marijuana with a street value of about $8 million. Agents also seized 5 trucks, 3 cars, the plane, and a motorhome. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the Federal Courthouse.
The governor filed his complaint in circuit court yesterday. The complaint argued that the 6 members of the Supreme Court were in an apparent conflict of interest when they issued a Senate-requested opinion about the governor's 2-day surprise vacation. The governor argued that the court's opinion would have the appearance of impropriety since the Senate is now in control of a pay raise measure that would give judges a salary increase ranging from 18 to 31%. But Judge Gordon threw that argument out. While Judge Gordon's decision was coming out, attorneys for the governor's office, anticipating the decision, had already filed another suit pressing the same point, that the Supreme Court members should have disqualified themselves from answering the Senate because of the pay raise issue. A hearing on that won't come today, but it should be scheduled this week. The fight between the governor's office and the Supreme Court actually started out as a legal battle between the governor's office and the Senate. The Senate had initiated the matter when it asked the Supreme Court if the governor's 2-day vacation affected some bills that had been passed during that time. The governor now says he's committed to fight the Supreme Court's apparent conflict of interest with every available resource. That could mean the beginning of a long summer of dissent between the 3 branches of government during an election year. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol. The governor's motion to Judge Gordon asked that he issue an order requiring the justices to recuse themselves from a Senate-requested opinion. The governor argued that the 6 justices of the Supreme Court appeared to be in a conflict of interest by answering an opinion for the Senate while the Senate controls a judicial pay raise issue. But Judge Gordon threw the governor's complaint out. In his written opinion, Gordon essentially said the Senate had no one else to answer their question for them. Had the justices excused themselves, as the governor requested, then the only recourse would have been for the governor to appoint a new judicial body to hear the Senate's question. But at that point, the appointed body would have the apparent conflict of interest in that they were appointed by the governor. But the governor hasn't given up. He's filed yet another complaint in circuit court that would render the Supreme Court's opinion null and void, again based on the premise of a conflict of interest between the justices and the Senate's pay raise issue. That complaint wound up in the hands of Judge Joseph Phelps, who hasn't set a hearing date as of yet. All of this started when the Senate asked the Supreme Court for an opinion about the effect of the governor's 4-day Easter weekend vacation and the bills that